Have you ever said yes when every part of you meant no? Not because you genuinely wanted to, not because the request was reasonable, or the timing was right, or the energy was available, but because the alternative, the disappointment on someone's face, the tension that might follow, the possibility of someone being even slightly unhappy with you, felt genuinely unbearable, felt, somewhere beneath rational thought, like something your nervous system simply could not afford. If that experience is familiar, if the act of agreeing, accommodating, and making yourself available has felt less like a choice and more like a compulsion for most of your life, then what follows may offer you something this particular pattern rarely receives. Not judgment, not a checklist of things to fix about yourself, but genuine understanding. The kind that begins not with what you are doing wrong, but with why this pattern made perfect sense in the first place. Because that question, not what is wrong with you, but what happened to you, is where everything meaningful begins. Most people are familiar with three of the four trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze. What gets discussed far less, and what may be the most common trauma response of all, is the fourth one: fawning. The fawn response doesn't look like trauma from the outside. It looks like kindness, like flexibility, like being easy to get along with, like the kind of generous, accommodating person that everyone seems to appreciate having around. But beneath that surface, woven so deeply into the pattern that it becomes almost impossible to separate, is something very different from generosity. It is fear. The fear that if you stop being agreeable, you will lose the connection. That if you express what you actually need, you will become too much. That if you show the real version of yourself, the one with limits, with preferences, with an inner life that sometimes differs from what others want, something essential will be taken away. This fear didn't arrive in adulthood, it was learned early, thoroughly, in a specific context of relationships where being fully yourself felt genuinely dangerous. And understanding where it came from, truly understanding it, is the beginning of being able to do something about it. Dr. Gabor Maté's work offers one of the most compassionate and psychologically precise frameworks for understanding why the fawn response develops. Central to his thinking is the tension between two fundamental needs that every child is born with: the need for authenticity, knowing what you feel, expressing what you need, existing in honest contact with your own inner experience, and the need for attachment, being close to, accepted by, and safe within the relationships that sustain you. In a healthy environment, these two needs support each other. You can be fully yourself and fully loved at the same time. Your realness deepens the connection rather than threatening it. But when the environment communicates something different, when being authentic, expressing needs, or showing difficult emotions creates instability in the attachment relationship, the child faces an impossible dilemma. And the child always chooses the same way. Attachment wins. Because for a developing child, attachment is not optional. It is biological survival. And so authenticity gets suppressed, the real self gets set aside, and in its place, a strategy develops, sophisticated, effective, and extraordinarily costly, of managing the emotional environment of the people around you. In order to maintain the connection you cannot survive without. That strategy is the fawn response, and for many people that never stops. Here are 7 signs that it may still be running your life. Sign 1, you apologize constantly for things that are not your fault in situations that require no apology at all. The apologies of someone stuck in fawning are not ordinary social courtesy. They are reflexive, automatic, arriving before there has been any time to assess whether an apology is actually warranted. Someone bumps into you, you apologize. Someone else is in a bad mood, you apologize. You ask a perfectly reasonable question and preface it with "sorry to bother you." You exist in proximity to someone else's inconvenience and feel at a level so deep it has no words that your presence there requires justification. This pattern makes complete sense when you understand its origin. The child who grew up in an environment where their natural existence, their noise, their needs, their emotional expression was met with parental irritation, withdrawal, or emotional unavailability, absorbed a specific lesson, not as a thought, as a body level conviction. I am an imposition. My presence requires apology. That conviction doesn't disappear when the childhood context does. It travels forward into every adult relationship, every workplace interaction, every moment the person occupies space that feels, in some wordless part of their emotional architecture, like it belongs to someone else. The constant apologizing is not low self-esteem in the ordinary sense. It is the fawn response expressing its oldest, most automated belief that the self, as it actually is, requires justification to exist. Sign 2. You have genuine difficulty knowing what you want and feel uncomfortable when someone asks. This runs deeper than indecisiveness. It is not that the person is stuck in fawning its preferences, but struggles to voice them. It is that the capacity to know their own preferences has been so thoroughly suppressed for so long in service of tracking and responding to everyone else's preferences, that accessing it feels genuinely difficult. Ask someone deeply stuck in this pattern where they want to go for dinner. Watch what happens. They will deflect. Offer options for the other person to choose from. Say whatever you want is fine, not as politeness, but because the question of what they want feels, at some barely perceptible level, not quite applicable to them. As though preferences are something other people have. And they are the one whose role is to accommodate them. This is the direct consequence of a childhood in which attending to one's own inner experience was not safe, where the energy that might have gone toward knowing the self, toward the slow, exploratory process through which children develop a sense of their own desires and values, was entirely redirected outward, toward monitoring, toward anticipating, toward adjusting. According to Gabor Maté's framework, this disconnection from the authentic self is one of the most fundamental costs of the fawn response. The self that was never allowed to know itself arrives in adulthood as something of a stranger to its own inner life. And learning to know oneself again, or perhaps for the first time, is one of the most meaningful and most challenging dimensions of healing. Sign 3. You feel personally responsible for other people's emotional states and genuinely distressed when someone around you is unhappy. This sign often feels like empathy, and there is real empathy woven into it. People stuck in fawning are frequently extraordinarily attuned to others. Their childhood training in reading emotional climates produced a genuine skill, a real sensitivity, a real capacity to notice what other people feel, often before those people have consciously registered it themselves. But beneath the empathy, inseparable from it, is something else entirely: the compulsive sense of responsibility for what they are reading. The feeling that if someone in their environment is upset or disappointed or uncomfortable, it is their job to fix it. And if they cannot fix it, something is wrong with them. This feeling is not rational. The person experiencing it often knows, intellectually, that they are not responsible for another adult's emotional state. But knowing it intellectually and not feeling it in the body are entirely different things. In the body, in the nervous system, the old equation runs without interruption. Other person's distress equals threat, threat equals mobilize everything to make it better. From a developmental perspective, this equation was formed in the conditions described earlier. The child whose safety depended on the caregiver's emotional state, who learned that a calm parent meant safety and a distressed parent meant danger, developed a nervous system that treats other people's emotions as directly relevant to their own survival. That wiring doesn't dissolve when the childhood context changes. And in adulthood, it creates a particular exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who cannot fully rest in any relationship because they are perpetually managing not just their own emotional experience, but everyone else's simultaneously. Sign 4. Saying no feels almost impossible, and when you try, the anxiety that follows is overwhelming. The difficulty with saying no in the fawn response is not about conflict avoidance in the ordinary sense. It is about something more fundamental. The conviction held in the nervous system with the force of established fact that the no itself is dangerous, that declining a request, expressing a limit, asserting a preference that differs from what someone else wants carries genuine risk. The risk of rejection, of withdrawal, of losing the connection that part of the nervous system still experiences as necessary for survival. Many people stuck in fawning describe a very specific physical experience when they attempt to say no: a tightening in the throat, a wave of anxiety that seems wildly out of proportion to the situation, an almost overwhelming urge to take back the limit being expressed and replace it with accommodation before it causes the damage the nervous system is predicting. This physical experience is not imagination. It is the body living out the memory of a time when exactly this, expressing a limit, being something other than agreeable, carried real consequences, measured in parental coldness, in emotional withdrawal, in the rupture of the attachment relationship that felt like the most important thing in the world. The adult body does not know that the context has changed. It only knows the pattern. And the pattern says no is dangerous, accommodation is safety, agreement, however exhausting, is survival. Sign 5. You minimize your own pain, often before anyone else has had the chance to dismiss it. This is one of the most heartbreaking features of the fawn response. Before anyone has dismissed the person's pain, they dismiss it themselves. Before anyone has told them their experience is not important enough to warrant attention, they have already decided it isn't. They use a specific kind of language about themselves. It wasn't that bad. Other people have it so much worse. I'm probably overreacting. I don't want to make it a bigger deal than it is. They contextualize their suffering until it disappears. They qualify their pain until there is nothing left of it that seems to merit care. And then they wonder why they feel invisible, why no one truly sees them, why their relationships feel, despite all of their caretaking effort, somehow fundamentally insufficient. The answer is not that no one is capable of seeing them. The answer is that they have become expert at making themselves invisible, at presenting the version of themselves that requires the least from anyone, that has already absorbed every possible diminishment and preempted every dismissal before anyone else has had the chance. Psychologists working within trauma-informed frameworks observe this pattern as the internalization of early dismissal. The child whose pain was consistently minimized, whose tears were met with "you're fine," whose fear was met with "stop being dramatic," does not only absorb the external dismissal, they absorb the dismissing voice itself. They take it inside, and they do the work so efficiently that they spare the world the trouble of having to do it for them. Sign 6. You carry a persistent low-grade resentment that you cannot fully justify and feel guilty for feeling it. People stuck in fawning are not without anger. They are people in whom anger has been so thoroughly suppressed, redirected, transformed, buried beneath layers of accommodation, that it has nowhere to go except inward. And inward anger, held over time, becomes resentment. The slow, steady accumulation of all the yeses that were actually no's, all the accommodations that cost something real, all the needs that went unvoiced and unmet while the person was busy attending to everyone else's. The resentment is usually experienced not as anger, but as the vague, inexplicable dissatisfaction, a feeling that something is fundamentally unfair, though articulating exactly what feels almost impossible. A quiet bitterness that arises most often in moments of particularly intense caretaking, when the person has just gone far beyond reasonable in service of someone else and received in return something that felt entirely insufficient. And then comes the guilt, because the person stuck in fawning has internalized, alongside everything else, the belief that having needs is selfish, that resentment is a character flaw, that the discomfort they feel is evidence of their own inadequacy, rather than a completely natural response to a chronic imbalance between giving and receiving. This guilt about the resentment creates a particularly painful loop. The resentment cannot be expressed because expressing it would be selfish. The needs driving the resentment cannot be voiced because voicing needs is dangerous. And so the resentment builds quietly, steadily, beneath the surface of the continued accommodation. The resentment is not a character defect, it is a signal. The authentic self, patient beyond all reasonable measure, communicating that something important has been missing for a very long time. Sign 7. Your sense of self shifts dramatically depending on who you are with, and alone, you sometimes feel you don't know who you actually are. This final sign points to the deepest consequence of the fawn response. People deeply stuck in fawning often describe a particular experience when asked to reflect on their own identity. They notice that who they are, how they think, what they believe, what they want, what they value, changes significantly depending on the social context they are in. With one person, they are one version of themselves. With another, a quite different version. The personality is fluid in a way that goes beyond ordinary social adaptability. It is more radical than that. It is the absence of a stable center. Because the authentic self, the one that was progressively suppressed in service of the fawn response, never had sufficient space to develop the kind of robust, consistent inner core that most people take for granted. The self that was always performing, always adjusting, always accommodating, that self never had enough stable ground to develop genuine self-knowledge, genuine self-trust. Ask someone deeply stuck in fawning who they are when no one is watching. The question often produces not a clear answer, but a disorienting blankness, a groundlessness that feels, in its more intense forms, almost frightening. Because the self that was always watching everyone else, monitoring, adjusting, calibrating, never had the luxury of watching itself, never had the safety to simply be without performance, without the organizing question of what does this person need me to be right now. Gabor Maté's concept of the authentic self speaks directly to this experience. The authentic self is not a fixed essential thing waiting to be uncovered. It is the living capacity. The capacity to be in genuine, honest contact with your own experience, to know what you feel, to know what you need, to know what you value, without it shifting entirely based on who is present and what they seem to require. For someone whose entire developmental history was organized around suppressing this capacity, building it or building it for the first time is the work of healing. There's something that must be said directly to anyone who recognizes themselves in these 7 signs. You are not broken. The fawn response did not develop because something was fundamentally defective about you. It developed because something was genuinely difficult in your early environment. And your nervous system, brilliant, adaptive, working with everything available to it, found the most viable way to navigate that difficulty. It learned to manage relationships through accommodation rather than authenticity, because authenticity in that particular context was genuinely not safe enough to risk. That is not a personality flaw. That is intelligence in service of survival. But survival strategies are not meant to be permanent identities. They are meant to serve their purpose, and then, as the context changes, as safety gradually becomes more available, to loosen, to make room for something more genuine, more honest, more fully alive. The fawn response begins to loosen when the nervous system starts to trust, through direct experience rather than intellectual understanding, that it no longer needs to manage every connection to the performance of agreeableness. When it begins to discover, however tentatively, that genuine connection, the kind actually worth having, is not threatened by honesty, by limits, by the authentic self showing up with its real needs and its real responses and its real inner life. This discovery takes time. It cannot be rushed. It is made not through understanding alone, but through experience, through the gradual, courageous, non-linear practice of being slightly more yourself in small moments, in safer relationships, in the quiet private space of your own honest attention. and discovering with some surprise that the world does not end, that the connection does not dissolve, that you are, in fact, more genuinely present, more genuinely connected when you are more genuinely yourself. As Gabor Maté's work consistently and compassionately reminds us, healing is not the eradication of the adaptive self, it is the gradual, patient, honest restoration of the authentic one. Not as a replacement for connection, as its deepest foundation. Because real connection, the kind that actually nourishes rather than depletes, was never built on self erasure. It was always built on the courage to be real. And that courage, however unfamiliar it may feel right now, however many years it has been quietly waiting beneath the surface of all the accommodation, is still available to you. It was there before the fawning began, and it is there still. If something in this conversation felt true, if one of these 7 signs landed in a way that was difficult to dismiss, take a genuine moment with that recognition. You don't have to resolve it today. Simply allowing yourself to see it clearly, without judgment, without the rush to fix it, is already something real. Share your thoughts in the comments if you'd like. Which sign resonated most honestly? What came up as you were listening? And if thoughtful conversations about psychology, trauma, and genuine healing feel valuable to you, consider subscribing. There is much more ahead, because understanding yourself, including the parts that have been hiding in plain sight beneath the performance of being fine, is always worth the effort.